May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Please be seated. I'm sure you've all heard those words before, but because we heard them in the psalm, I thought it would be good to use them before the sermon today. So as I mentioned in the little comment before the service began, our focus today is on Jesus, on wisdom among us. What does wisdom among us look like? And the Christian answer to that question is, well, when the wisdom of God is among us, it looks and sounds like Jesus, because Jesus for us is the very incarnation of sacred wisdom. So we have this interplay of themes from creation, season, themes paying attention to the wisdom tradition as particularly found in Proverbs and the letter of James, and focusing on the person of Jesus. And you will notice as we go through that all three hymns today have been chosen because they invite us to reflect on who Jesus is for us. So we've also been given a little reminder that the texts we're listening to are ancient texts and they come from a different culture. When James got stuck into his readers at one stage, those senseless people, I felt like saying James has not signed off on the Being Together document, which talks about how Anglicans are to treat each other with respect and kindness and compassion. And for that matter, good old Lady Wisdom in Proverbs is quite happy to threaten people with all kinds of dire consequences if they don't come and listen to her. So a reminder, we're looking for spiritual wisdom for now, but the texts we look into are texts that come from another time and another culture. And even the end of the gospel, there's a bit of a serve for anybody who doesn't measure up and do the right thing. We can do better than that, and we do better than that at least some of the time. So let's focus on the gospel reading. This is a really pivotal scene from the Gospel of Mark. It actually happens to come almost exactly halfway through the text, but more importantly, it marks a turning point in the story as Mark tells it. For the last several chapters, we don't know how many months or weeks might have been involved. Jesus has been active in various places around Galilee, getting into scraps with various people, particularly the authorised religious representatives from the temple. Almost said cathedral, no, the temple. And I've got to keep Peter awake, by the way. He's been sleeping today, so I've just got to throw in a couple of curly things now and then to wake Peter up, because he told me he might go to sleep during my sermon. So, how are we going, Peter? Still with us? Okay. So Jesus has been active as he's been doing all kinds of stuff. His reputation is growing. People are pretty amazed by what's going on. Last week we saw him in southern Lebanon, going to the city of Tyre, having a weekend off. And this week he's heading off into pagan territory, up in the very northern tip of the territory ruled by the family of Herod the Great. A sacred site at the base of Mount Hermon. The ancient name for this place was Paneas, P-A-N-E-A-S, Paneas, because it hosted an ancient sacred grotto in the cult of the Greek god Pan. And that ancient name, Paneas, still survives in the modern Arabic name, which is Banias with a B, because Arabic doesn't have the letter P. Guess what the capital of France is called? So in the time of Jesus, that name had been switching back and forth as various powerful men, or people wanting to be powerful, as the case may be, attached their own name to the site. When Mark talks about Jesus heading up that way, he names the place as Caesarea Philippi, which basically means This is the city that Philip built for Caesar, which was a look at me kind of project by the government of Philip. Philip himself was actually recycling a project done by his father, Herod the Great. This is a bit like governments re-announcing projects that they've already announced. Okay, we know how this happens. So Philip is actually recycling a project of his father, Herod the Great, who had built a massive pagan temple there in honour of Augustus, right next to the sacred grotto of Pan. He built the Augusteum. A couple of decades after Jesus' life, the Roman Emperor Nero would rename Panias, or Caesarea Philippi, as Neronius, the city of Nero. Thank you very much. In other words, this was a place where people dreamed of power and influence, and as Mark tells the story, he knows that's what the word Caesarea Philippi, or the phrase Caesarea Philippi, is going to resonate in people's minds. In fact, by the time Mark is being written, Caesarea Philippi was the seat of the last remaining fragment of Jewish self-government following the Jewish war against Rome from 66 to 73. Agrippa II continued to reign as King of the Jews, with his government based at Caesarea Philippi. So as Mark is telling the story, and as his readers are hearing that geography, they're beginning to think about who's in charge? What does power look like? Who has authority to shape our future? So the question is, why has Jesus taken his disciples that way up to Caesarea Philippi when we know that he's about to turn in the opposite direction and start heading south towards Jerusalem? It's a puzzle, and we don't have answers to every question. That's life, eh? So as they make their way northwards towards that seat of power, Jesus asks his disciples, his inner set of companions, "So guys, what are people saying about me?" as we head towards Caesarea Philippi. After all the miracles, after all the arguments, after all the teaching, all the things that have happened, all the demons that have been cast out, sick people that have been healed, what are people saying about Jesus? He's not so much seeking fame, but he's certainly wondering what kind of impact he's having on his audience. So the disciples give it their best shot. After all, Jesus asked them a question. So, well, we've done a little opinion poll, Jesus, 2,000-year-old opinion poll, and some folk around here, they reckon you are John the Baptist, come back to life and doing stuff again, all over again. That wasn't a bad answer. John the Baptist had been murdered, executed by Philip's half-brother. There's Philip the Tetrarch, one of Herod's sons, his half-brother Antipas, and his rival to their old man's title as King of the Jews, had John the Baptist executed. We all know that famous story when the new wife encourages her daughter to go and do a really sexy dance, get the husband really excited, and he'll promise anything. And what she most wants, on the advice of her mother, is the head of John the Baptist on a plate. Gruesome story, okay? That's the story in the background. By the way, Herodias had been Philip's wife before she became Antipas's wife. So some things don't change much. So it wasn't a bad answer to say, well, some people think you are kind of John the Baptist 2.0. After all, Jesus had been a disciple of John. John had been his master, and it had been John who baptized Jesus back at the start of the story. And indeed, Jesus really only launched his own project, his Kingdom of God project, after John had been arrested That was kind of a transition for Jesus, and so people weren't far off the money. Other people were saying, wow, this Jesus guy, he's Elijah, finally. We've been waiting for Elijah to come. Every Passover there's a cup, an extra cup placed on the table for Elijah. Jewish people continuing to look for the coming of Elijah. And if we were to keep on reading, the very next story in Mark's Gospel is going to be the Transfiguration story, and guess who turns up on top of the mountain? None other but Elijah and Moses. So it wasn't a bad idea to say, this is like Elijah, finally he's here. Big stuff is about to happen, is what that means. Others weren't quite so specific, apparently. They went, well, it's sort of like one of the ancient prophets from Bible times has come back and is here with us again. They were probably thinking of Moses, and indeed Moses is the other character alongside Elijah and Jesus at the Transfiguration story. But they may have been thinking of Jonah, the guy with the strange fish story, that fellow. Because not only was he a prophet from Galilee, but even Jesus talks about, if you want to understand me, you need to pay attention to the sign of the prophet Jonah. Jonah appears to have come, well, was believed at least to have come from a little village not far from Nazareth, Mashed, and as it's called these days, and indeed there's a mosque there that claims to have Jonah's grave, of course. So he was a local prophet, and he was somebody that even Jesus talks about. So there were a few different answers kind of bubbling up. They were all saying, in a sense, something big is happening here. Okay, something big is happening here. And then Jesus puts the blowtorch on the disciples and says, so who do you say I am? And Peter blurts out an answer. You're the Messiah. His answer was correct, but then Jesus says, keep your mouth shut. Don't tell anybody that, which is all a bit weird, okay? These are ancient texts, remember, and certainly from Mark, and particularly from Mark, there's this theme running through his story of Jesus, where in fact nobody can understand who Jesus is until you get to the end of the story, and only then does it make sense. So Peter has the correct answer, but Jesus surprisingly says, don't let anybody know that answer. And then, in the way Mark tells the story, suddenly we find that the crowd have been there all along, because Jesus then calls the crowds over to him, and he starts talking to the crowd, not just to the 12 disciples. So the very people who apparently have confused and incoherent ideas about Jesus have been travelling along on this journey up to the northern edges of Palestine. And so Jesus' words to them are of course addressed to us as much as they were to the people who were just going along for the journey, no idea what was happening. If any want to become my followers, that's probably us, let them deny themselves. Oh, maybe it's not us. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? These are not words addressed to the disciples who have been doing the advanced discipleship course with Jesus. These are words addressed to the crowd who saw something was happening and they just thought they'd follow along. Okay? It's a call to discipleship. Beliefs, ideas, opinions about Jesus are important. It's worth trying to get them sorted out. But actions matter far more. To be a follower of Jesus, according to Mark, means we stop seeking fame, power, wealth, influence. Instead, we're ready to waste our lives for the sake of others, so they come first and the good news can flourish in this world. So 2 questions as we wrap up these reflections this morning. This is your homework, I guess, to go away and think about during the week. Question number 1. What does Jesus mean to you? You don't have to bring your answers next week, but think about that question during the week. What does Jesus mean to me? The second question is, how is my own life, how is your own life forever changed because of what Jesus means to you? I'll stop there. Is Peter still awake? Good. Okay, great. Because you're on next, Peter.